You will never look at your own family the same way again after hearing this story. My name is Eleanor, and this is the tale of the dangerous game I had to play to reclaim my own life. If my stories give you strength, please take a moment to look at the super thanks button below the video. Now, if you are ready, begin walking with me down the cold corridors of betrayal. The rain was falling in cold, unforgiving sheets, plastering my graying hair to my scalp. My hands, the same hands that had rocked my children to sleep and held my husband's for 40 years, were bleeding. My fingernails broken against the solid oak of my own front door. Inside, my family was watching me die. Not a physical death, but something far worse. The death of a life, of an identity, all stolen in the blink of an eye. The door, which had been slammed shut only moments before, remained a silent wooden tombstone to everything I had ever known. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see them. My husband, David, his face a mask of confusion and pity, not for me, but for the monster who stood in my place. My children, Leo and Mia, stood behind him, their young faces reflecting his own bewildered sorrow. And there, in the warm, golden light of my living room, stood Catherine, my twin sister. She was wearing my favorite cashmere sweater, the one David had given me for our last anniversary. A faint, triumphant smile played on her lips as she watched me. It was my smile, my lips, but the expression was entirely her own, cold, cruel, and victorious. "Please!" I screamed, my voice raw and torn. "David, it's me! Look at me!" He just shook his head slowly, his hand resting gently on Catherine's shoulder. "Eleanor, darling, please," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. And he called her Eleanor. The name felt like acid on my tongue. The police had already been and gone. Two young officers who saw two identical women, one calm and composed, the other hysterical and raving on the front lawn. Catherine had played her part perfectly, tears welling in her identical blue eyes as she told them how her poor, troubled sister had been suffering from delusions for months. She had even produced a forged letter from a psychiatrist. I was the crazy one, the impostor. They had looked at me with a professional, detached sympathy. "Ma'am, we can't get involved in a family dispute. Perhaps you should seek some help." They left me there, shivering on the wet pavement, locked out of a life I had spent 65 years building. I saw my own reflection in the darkened window, a ghost of a woman, drenched and defeated. But behind that reflection, inside my home, was the true monster, a perfect copy who had methodically, brilliantly stolen everything from me. How had it come to this? How does a life unravel so completely? It began with an act of love, an act of pity. It began with a letter, received on a sunny Tuesday morning just 6 months ago. Before Catherine, my life was a quiet river of contentment. David and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The passionate fires of youth mellowed into the warm, steady embers of a long and loving marriage. Our children were grown, building their own lives, but always returning for Sunday dinners. My garden was my sanctuary, a place where I could coax life from the soil, a predictable and rewarding joy. It was a good life, a life I had never taken for granted, especially knowing that somewhere in the world, the other half of me existed, a sister I had never known. We were separated at birth, a painful decision made by a destitute single mother in the 1950s. I was adopted by a loving couple. Catherine was lost to the foster care system. For decades, she was just a faded photograph, a whisper of a question in my heart. I had searched for her intermittently over the years, but the trail always went cold. I had accepted that we might never meet. Then, the letter arrived. The envelope was cheap, the handwriting shaky and unfamiliar. Inside, a few short, hesitant sentences explained everything. "My name is Catherine Reed. I believe you are my sister. I have been looking for you my entire life." We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. I remember waiting by the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When she walked in, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. She was me, but life had been far less kind to her reflection. Her face had the same structure, the same eyes, but they were shadowed by a weariness I had never known. Her hands were rough, her clothes worn. There were lines around her mouth that spoke of hardship, not laughter. The moment our eyes met, we both began to cry. It was a reunion 40 years in the making, a torrent of unspoken words and shared sorrow. We talked for hours. She told me of a life spent moving between foster homes, of struggles and loneliness. Her story was tragic, filled with vague details and heartbreaking pauses that only made me want to embrace her tighter, to shield her from any more pain. I felt a profound, aching guilt for my own comfortable existence, for the warmth and love I had been given while she had shivered in the cold. That very day, I made the decision that would ultimately destroy me. "You're not alone anymore," I told her, my hand covering hers. "My home is your home now, your family." The gratitude in her eyes seemed as deep and real as the ocean. She moved into our guest room that weekend. David and the children welcomed her with open arms, fascinated by this living, breathing piece of their mother's history. For the first few weeks, it was bliss. Our house, once so quiet, was now filled with laughter and stories. I felt as though a missing piece of my soul had finally been returned. I had welcomed my long-lost sister into my home, never realizing I had just opened the door to my own replacement. Those first few months with Catherine felt like living in a dream. My quiet, orderly home was suddenly alive with a new energy. We'd stay up late into the night sharing stories, piecing together the parallel lives we had led. I would speak of school dances, of my first date with David, of the overwhelming love I felt when Leo and Mia were born. She would speak of the cold emptiness of foster homes, of the constant ache of not belonging, of seeing families in the park and wondering what that warmth felt like. Each story she told was a thread in the tapestry of her victimhood, and with each thread, she wove herself deeper into the fabric of my compassion. I showered her with everything I thought she had missed. I bought her beautiful clothes to replace her threadbare ones, took her to fancy restaurants, introduced her to all my friends as my miraculous long-lost sister. David was wonderful, treating her with a gentle, protective kindness. Leo and Mia were captivated, eager to know their new aunt. We were, for a short, brilliant moment, a perfect, complete family. I was so blinded by the joy of our reunion that I failed to see the subtle, methodical way she began her infiltration. It started with observation. Catherine was a sponge, soaking up every detail of my life. She would sit in the kitchen while I cooked, watching my every move, asking endless questions. "How do you make your pie crust so flaky, Elle? What's David's favorite meal? Do the kids prefer their sandwiches cut into triangles or rectangles?" At the time, I saw it as a genuine interest, a desire to understand the family she had just joined. I didn't realize she was studying for a role, memorizing her lines. Her questions soon became more personal. "Tell me about the day you and David met," she'd ask, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "What were the exact words he said to you?" Or, "What was the lullaby you used to sing to Leo when he was a baby? Sing it for me." I would indulge her, happily reliving my most cherished memories, unaware that I was handing her the keys to my past. Then came the mimicry. It began with small things. She started doing her hair in the same way I did, a simple, elegant chignon at the nape of the neck. She adopted my habit of humming softly while I gardened. One afternoon I heard her on the phone with one of her old acquaintances, and was startled to hear her use a turn of phrase that was distinctly mine. "Well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles." A small thing, insignificant on its own, but it was the first time I felt a flicker of unease, a sense that I was looking at a reflection that was becoming a little too perfect. David, ever the peacemaker, would laugh it off. "It's only natural, Elle," he'd say when I mentioned it. "She's your twin. She spent her whole life without a model, and now she has you. She admires you." I let myself believe him. I wanted to believe him. The alternative was too unsettling to contemplate. But her study of me was relentless. She would go through old photo albums for hours, asking me to name every person, to recount every memory associated with the faded images. "Who was this, Elle? Your best friend from high school? What was she like? What were your inside jokes?" I, the willing narrator of my own life, gave her everything she needed. I was arming my enemy and calling it sisterly love. The most disturbing part was her focus on my relationship with David. She wanted to know everything: our history, our private jokes, the intimate landscape of our marriage. One evening, the three of us were sitting in the living room, and I recounted the story of David's clumsy proposal on a rowboat in the middle of a lake. It was a story I had told 100 times, a beloved piece of our family lore. Catherine listened with rapt attention, her gaze shifting between David and me, her smile a perfect replica of my own fond reminiscence. The next day, David came home from work looking puzzled. "The strangest thing just happened," he said. "Catherine called me at the office just to tell me she was thinking about that rowboat story and how romantic it was. She even remembered that little detail about the ducks stealing our sandwiches." My blood ran cold. That wasn't a detail I had shared the night before. It was a small, private piece of the memory, something only David and I knew. I had told it to Catherine once, weeks earlier, in a moment of confidence. She had stored it away, a shiny piece of stolen intimacy, only to present it to my husband as if it were her own. "She's just trying to connect with us, Elle," David said, misinterpreting the look on my face. "She wants to be part of the family." But that wasn't it. She didn't want to be part of the family. She wanted to be the center of it. She wanted to be me. The red flags were no longer small, fluttering warnings in the distance. They were giant crimson banners snapping in a hurricane wind. But my desperate need for this new, complete family made me colorblind. I saw only what I wanted to see: a sister, lost and found, finally home. I was a fool, tending to a viper in my own garden, mistaking its patient, watchful stillness for peaceful gratitude. The initial joy of our reunion, once a brilliant, warming sun, slowly began to feel like an oppressive, humid heat. The transition was so gradual, so cleverly disguised under the cloak of familial affection, that I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the weather changed. I only knew that I had started to feel a constant, low-level chill in my own home. Catherine's mimicry had evolved into a more invasive form of assimilation. It was no longer enough for her to study me. She had begun to actively erase the lines between us. It started with my clothes. One morning, she came down for breakfast wearing my favorite silk blouse. "I hope you don't mind, Elle," she said with a breezy smile, pouring herself a cup of coffee from my pot. "I saw it in your closet and it was just too beautiful to resist. We're the same size after all." I was taken aback but said nothing. What could I say? To object would have seemed petty, ungenerous. So I smiled and told her it looked lovely on her. It became a regular occurrence. My wardrobe became our wardrobe. I'd reach for a dress for a lunch with friends, only to find it missing, and would later see Catherine returning home in it. A casual, "thanks for the loan" tossed over her shoulder. Then she set her sights on my relationships. She began to carve out her own space within my family, positioning herself as a confidant, an alternate mother, a better wife. She'd spend hours talking to David in his study, ostensibly asking for advice about finding a job. but their conversations were always punctuated with low, conspiratorial laughter. When I'd walk in, the conversation would often stop abruptly, and they would both look up with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Just sisterly talk, darling, Catherine would say, waving a dismissive hand. You know, girl stuff. But it felt like more than that. It felt like I was interrupting something private. She was even more effective with the children. With Leo, my pragmatic, serious son, she became the cool aunt, listening to his complaints about work and offering advice that subtly undermined my own. Your mother just wants what's best for you, of course, she'd tell him, her tone oozing with sympathy. But sometimes I think she forgets you're a grown man. She can be a bit overprotective, can't she? She was planting seeds of doubt, tiny poisonous kernels of discord that she watered with feigned concern. With Mia, my sensitive artistic daughter, her approach was different. She preyed on Mia's insecurities. It must have been difficult growing up with a mother who was so put together, she said one afternoon while they were supposedly baking cookies. I overheard them from the hallway. Do you ever feel like you can't measure up? She presented herself as an ally, the one person who understood the pressure of living in my shadow, all while reinforcing the very existence of that shadow. My own home began to feel like foreign territory. I was an outsider looking in on a life that was still technically mine, but no longer felt like it belonged to me. A quiet anxiety started to hum beneath the surface of my skin. I tried to speak to David about it one night as we were getting ready for bed. David, I began hesitantly, don't you think Catherine is a little intense sometimes? He turned from the mirror, his brow furrowed. Intense? What do you mean? I think she's wonderful. She's finally blossoming, Elle. It's a beautiful thing to see. But it's the way she's inserting herself into everything, into us. He sighed, a sound of weary patience that I had come to dread. Eleanor, she's your twin sister, who has had a terrible life. She's making up for lost time. Can't you just be happy for her? Honestly, you're starting to sound a little jealous. Jealous. The word was a slap in the face. It was the perfect defense, the one accusation I couldn't deny without sounding exactly like the thing he was accusing me of. Was I jealous? Was I so selfish that I couldn't share the spotlight in my own life with my less fortunate sister? His words shamed me into silence. I began to question my own perceptions. I convinced myself that he was right, that this discomfort was a flaw in my own character, a testament to my own insecurity, not her manipulation. But the incidents kept accumulating, like cracks spreading across a fragile piece of glass. My weekly bridge game with my oldest friends became a prime example. Catherine asked if she could join, and of course, I said yes. The first time, she mostly watched. The second time, she played a few hands. By the fifth time, she had somehow become the star of the show, telling my stories as her own, charming my friends with anecdotes she had stolen from my past. They were captivated by her. She was a novelty, the tragic twin, the mirror image with a darker, more interesting history. The final crack, the one that broke the glass completely, came on the day of my charity luncheon. I had been organizing it for months. It was for a local children's hospital, a cause very dear to my heart. I was due to give the opening speech. The day before, Catherine came to me, her face a picture of concern. Elle, you look absolutely exhausted. You've been running yourself ragged with this luncheon. Why don't you let me help? I could proofread your speech for you. Grateful for the offer, I gave her the speech I had worked on for weeks. That night I slept poorly, my mind still racing with last-minute details. The next morning, I couldn't find my speech anywhere. I searched my desk, my bedside table, my purse. Nothing. A knot of panic tightened in my stomach. Catherine came into my room looking concerned. What's wrong, dear? I can't find my speech. I left it right here on the desk. Oh, Eleanor, she said, shaking her head with pity. You've been so forgetful lately. Don't you remember? You gave it to me last night and said you were too tired to look at it again. You told me to make any changes I thought were necessary. I stared at her, my mind blank. I had no memory of saying that. But I would never. Don't worry, she said, patting my arm with a condescending sweetness. I knew you weren't yourself. I stayed up all night and memorized it for you. I can deliver it if you're not feeling up to it. And just like that, she had cornered me. To refuse would be to admit I had lost my mind. To accept was to let her take my place. I walked into that luncheon a hollowed out version of myself. I sat at the head table and watched as my twin sister, my own reflection, walked to the podium. She was wearing my navy blue suit, the one I had planned to wear. She looked out at the crowd, my crowd, and began to speak, delivering my words with a passion and conviction that made them her own. She was brilliant. She was me, but better. And as the room erupted in applause, I looked across the table and saw my husband beaming at her with a pride that used to be reserved for me. It was in that moment, under the bright lights of my own stolen success, that I finally understood. This wasn't jealousy. This was war. The applause from the charity luncheon echoed in my ears long after I had returned home. It was a hollow, mocking sound. I had walked back in a daze, Catherine floating beside me on a cloud of stolen praise, accepting congratulations from people who had known me for 20 years. She handled it all with a grace and poise that was chilling. She was a natural. David drove us home, chattering excitedly about how well the speech had been received, how Catherine had saved the day. He didn't seem to notice my stony silence, or if he did, he attributed it to fatigue, or worse, to the petty jealousy he had accused me of before. When we got home, I walked straight into the living room and turned to face them. The time for silent suffering was over. The time for questioning my own sanity was over. The woman standing in my living room, basking in the glow of my husband's admiration, was not my sister. She was a thief. I want you out of my house, I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the cheerful atmosphere like a shard of glass. Catherine's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. David looked at me, utterly bewildered. Eleanor, what on earth are you talking about? Are you feeling all right? I am feeling clearer than I have in months, I said, my gaze locked on Catherine. I know what you did. You stole my speech. You've been stealing my clothes, my stories, my life. It ends now. I want you to pack your things and leave. Catherine's face crumpled. It was a masterful performance. Her lower lip trembled, and tears instantly welled in her eyes. She looked at David with a wounded, terrified expression. David, I don't understand, she whispered, her voice choked with manufactured sobs. What did I do wrong? I was only trying to help. Help? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You call that helping? You've been systematically replacing me in my own home. Darling, David said, stepping between us, his hands raised in a placating gesture. He was speaking to me, but his body was positioned to shield Catherine. You're overwrought. The luncheon was a lot of pressure. You're not thinking clearly. She's been manipulating all of you, I insisted, my voice rising with a frantic desperation. She's not who you think she is. That was when Catherine played her trump card. She collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs, burying her face in her hands. I knew this would happen, she cried. The doctor warned me. He said the stress could trigger another episode. Episode? David asked, his face pale with alarm as he rushed to her side. What episode? Through her tears, Catherine looked up at him. Eleanor. She's been unwell, David, for a while now. The delusions, the paranoia. I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it. But this is the worst it's ever been. It was brilliant. Diabolically brilliant. In one swift move, she had reframed my righteous anger as madness. She had used the very truth I was screaming as proof of my insanity. Leo and Mia, drawn by the shouting, appeared in the doorway, their faces etched with concern. They saw their mother yelling and their Aunt Catherine weeping in terror. The narrative was already set, and that's when it happened. The scene that would replay in my nightmares for months. David, my husband of 40 years, looked at me not with love, but with fear. "Eleanor," he said, his voice firm, "you are scaring your sister. You are scaring all of us. I think you need to leave until you've calmed down." "Leave?" I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "This is my home. Not when you're like this," he said, his jaw tight. He walked to the front door and opened it. The command was unspoken but clear, and that is how I ended up on my own lawn, in the rain, screaming for a family that no longer recognized me. The expulsion was swift and brutal. My own son, Leo, wouldn't meet my eyes as he gently but firmly guided me out the door. Mia was crying, her hand over her mouth. They weren't monsters. They were victims, just as I was, caught in the web of a master manipulator. After the police left, after the last vestige of authority had dismissed me as a hysterical woman, I was left with nothing but the cold rain and a crushing, absolute despair. My life was in that house, my wallet, my car keys, my phone, everything. I had only the clothes on my back. I stumbled down the street in a daze, the tidy suburban homes of my neighbors blurring through my tears. I had to get help. Someone had to believe me. I went to the house of my closest friend, Margaret, who lived 3 blocks away. I banged on her door, my panic rising. When she opened it, her face was a mixture of pity and alarm. "Eleanor, my goodness, what happened? You're soaked. Margaret, you have to help me," I gasped. "It's Catherine. She's taken over. David and the kids. They threw me out. They think I'm crazy." Margaret's expression shifted. The alarm remained, but it was now directed at me. She wrung her hands, avoiding my desperate gaze. "Oh, Eleanor, dear," she said softly. "Catherine called me this morning. She told me you might have a breakdown. She said you've been saying some very confusing things lately." The ground beneath my feet gave way. Catherine had been 1, 2, 10 steps ahead of me the entire time. She had systematically poisoned the well, calling my friends, my support system, and painting me as an unstable woman on the verge of collapse long before I even knew the war had begun. I tried 2 other friends. The story was the same: sympathy, pity, but a distinct, fearful distance. They offered me tea, a warm blanket, the number of a good therapist. No one offered me belief. I was utterly, completely alone. I wandered back to my street, a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. I sat on the curb across from my house, the rain finally slowing to a miserable drizzle. The lights were on inside. I could see the silhouettes of my family moving about. They were probably having dinner now, Catherine in my seat at the head of the table, comforting my husband and children, cementing her place as the sane, stable center of their world. It was in that moment, the lowest of my life, that the door to the house next door opened. Old Mr. Harrison, my quiet, reclusive neighbor, stepped out onto his porch. He was a retired man, a widower, someone I had only ever exchanged pleasantries with over the fence while I was gardening. He held a large black umbrella in one hand. He walked slowly, deliberately, across his lawn and then across the street, stopping directly in front of me. He didn't offer platitudes or expressions of pity. He just looked at me with a pair of eyes that were surprisingly sharp and intelligent. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He extended the umbrella over my head. "It seems you're having a rather dreadful evening." I could only nod, my throat too tight with unshed tears to speak. "I've been watching. he continued, his gaze shifting to my house and then back to me. For months, in fact. Little things. The way she walks is different, a fraction of an inch shorter in her stride than you. The way she holds her coffee cup, you use 3 fingers, she uses 4. And you, Mrs. Vance, you hate cashmere. You told me so yourself last spring. Said it makes you itch. He paused, letting his words sink in. He wasn't looking at me like I was crazy. He was looking at me like I was a puzzle he had just solved. My name is Arthur Harrison, he said, offering me a hand to help me up from the curb. I was a detective with the city police for 35 years, and I believe every single word you were screaming earlier. He looked at my house one last time, a flicker of something hard and determined in his eyes. Now, let's get you inside, shall we? We have a great deal to discuss. Arthur Harrison's home was nothing like mine. Where my house was filled with the soft, cluttered warmth of family life, photographs on every surface, children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, stacks of books by every chair, his was a place of quiet, meticulous order. It smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and black coffee. The furniture was old but well maintained. The books on his shelves were arranged by subject, and the only photograph on the mantelpiece was of a smiling woman with kind eyes, presumably his late wife. It was the home of a man who lived with ghosts, but who kept them in their proper place. He sat me down in a worn leather armchair, wrapped a thick wool blanket around my shivering shoulders, and placed a steaming mug of tea in my hands. I was still trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to the bone-deep chill of shock. For several long minutes he said nothing, simply allowing me the space to breathe, to feel the solid ground of his quiet living room beneath my feet. He didn't coddle me or offer empty platitudes. He simply waited, his intelligent eyes watching me with a patient, professional calm. "Start from the beginning," he said finally, his voice a steady anchor in my swirling sea of chaos. "And don't leave anything out, no matter how small it seems." And so, I told him everything. I spoke for nearly an hour, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of pain and confusion. I told him about the letter, the joyous reunion, the slow, creeping way Catherine had started to absorb my life. I told him about the stolen clothes, the co-opted stories, the way she had turned my own husband and children against me with her poisonous whispers. I recounted the horror of the luncheon, the final confrontation, and the utter desolation of being locked out of my own life while my family looked on. He listened without interruption, his gaze never wavering. He was like a stone wall, absorbing the force of my story without flinching. When I finally fell silent, exhausted and empty, he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The forged letter from the psychiatrist," he said, his voice sharp. "Did you see it?" "No," I stammered. "She just told the police she had one." "And the calls to your friends, Margaret and the others. She laid the groundwork for your breakdown before it even happened. This was premeditated, Mrs. Vance, highly organized. He wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know, but hearing it from him, stated as a professional assessment rather than a paranoid suspicion, was incredibly validating. A dam of unshed tears broke inside me, and for the first time that night I cried not from despair, but from the profound relief of being believed. "I'm not crazy," I whispered through my sobs. "No, ma'am, you are not," he said gently. "You are the victim of a very sophisticated and ruthless con artist who just happens to share your face." He got up and refilled my tea. "I suspected something was amiss weeks ago. I saw her one afternoon speaking on her cell phone in your garden. She thought she was alone. The expression on her face. It was nothing like the gentle, slightly sad woman she pretended to be. It was hard, like flint. And the way she spoke, it was all about timelines and assets. I heard her say, 'The accounts will be accessible as soon as the trust is finalized.' It meant nothing to me at the time, but it stuck with me. He sat back down, his expression grim. This isn't just about her wanting to be you, Mrs. Vance. This is about your money, your house, your savings, your investments. She's not here to steal your life for emotional reasons. She's here to liquidate it. The word liquidate sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. He was right. It wasn't just a psychological game, it was a heist, a hostile takeover of my entire existence. What do we do? I asked, my voice small. No one believes me. The police, my friends, David. They all think I'm the one who's sick. Confronting her is useless, Arthur said, shaking his head. She will only twist it further, use it as more proof of your instability. We can't fight her with emotion. We have to fight her with facts. Cold, hard, undeniable proof. He leaned back, the old detective in him coming alive, a spark igniting in his eyes. First, we need to know who she really is. This tragic story of a life in foster care, it's likely a complete fabrication, or at best, a heavily embellished version of the truth. People like this don't just appear out of nowhere. They have a history, a pattern. He walked over to an old roll-top desk and pulled out a notepad and a pen. I have a few old friends, a few favors I can call in. A former colleague who now runs a private investigation firm. We need to run a full background check on one Catherine Reed. We need to find out if she has a criminal record, a history of fraud, aliases. We need to find the trail of broken lives she's almost certainly left in her wake. For the first time since my world had shattered, I felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just offering sympathy, he was offering a plan. He was giving me a weapon. What can I do? I asked, eager to be more than just a victim. You, he said, turning to me, are the expert witness. You need to write down every single thing you can remember that she told you about her past. Every name, every city, every supposed foster family or dead-end job. Con artists are liars, but they often use fragments of the truth to build their lies. A real street name, a real person's first name. Any of those details could be the loose thread we need to pull to unravel her entire story. He pushed the notepad and pen across the coffee table toward me. Your family has been poisoned against you. Right now, we are the only two people in the world who know the truth. She thinks she has won. She thinks you're broken, isolated, and powerless. We are going to use that to our advantage. While she is busy playing the part of Eleanor Vance, we will be in the shadows, digging up the ghost of Catherine Reed. I picked up the pen, my hand still unsteady but now guided by a new sense of purpose. The grief and shock were still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but they were now mixed with something else. A cold, quiet rage, a burning need for justice. I was no longer a weeping woman on a wet curb. I was a survivor, and with my new, unlikely ally, I was ready to fight for my life. The days that followed were a strange mixture of terror and purpose. I spent my waking hours in the quiet sanctuary of Arthur's study, meticulously writing down every half-remembered detail Catherine had fed me about her tragic life story. It felt like performing an autopsy on a lie. Meanwhile, Arthur worked the phones, his voice a low, commanding murmur as he called in decades-old favors. He was a man reawakened, the retired detective shedding his quiet, neighborly skin to reveal the sharp, methodical hunter beneath. We were a two-person army, operating from a command center surrounded by rose bushes and garden gnomes. 3 days after our alliance was formed, the call came. It was from Arthur's private investigator friend, a man named Frank. Arthur put the call on speakerphone, and Frank's weary, cynical voice filled the room. "Artie, your ghost is real," Frank said without preamble. "And she's got a rap sheet longer than my arm. Catherine Reed doesn't exist. Not legally. The woman you're looking for is known primarily as Caroline Mitchell, but she's also been a Sarah Jennings in Arizona and a Rebecca Price in Florida. She's got warrants for fraud in 2 states. Her M.O., is always the same. She targets vulnerable people, usually older and lonely, ingratiates herself into their lives, and then systematically drains their finances before disappearing. My hand flew to my mouth. Hearing it laid out so clinically, so coldly, was sickening. She wasn't my broken sister. She was a predator. Her foster care story? Arthur asked. Mostly bogus, Frank replied. She was in the system for a couple of years as a teenager, but she ran away at 16. That's when the grifting started. She's a professional, Artie. She knows how to manipulate people, how to forge documents, how to cover her tracks. She's very, very good at what she does. After the call ended, a heavy silence settled over the room. All the vague, half-formed fears I'd had were now a concrete, terrifying reality. I had invited a professional criminal into my home, into the heart of my family. This confirms our worst fears, Arthur said, his expression grim. But it also gives us our greatest weapon, her past. Now we just need to connect Caroline Mitchell to the woman currently living in your house. The urgency of our mission was thrown into sharp relief the very next afternoon. Arthur was checking his mail when he suddenly froze, his back ramrod straight. He walked back into the house, a glossy real estate flyer in his hand. "They're not wasting any time," he said, his voice grim. He handed it to me. It was a new listing. My house, pictured in full color, described as a charming family home, priced for a quick sale. An open house was scheduled for the coming weekend. My heart plummeted. This wasn't a long-term plan for her. She was in the final stages of her heist. She was going to sell my home, empty my bank accounts, and disappear, leaving my family in the emotional and financial wreckage. "She's going to need my signature on the sale documents," I said, a knot of panic tightening in my chest. "How can she manage that?" "She can't," Arthur said. "Not legally, which means she'll forge it, and to do that she'll need a notary who is either complicit or negligent. And to empty your accounts, she'll need power of attorney, which she will also forge." He paced the small study, his mind clicking like the tumblers of a lock. "We need to catch her in the act. We need to hear the plan from her own mouth. We need proof that will be irrefutable, not just to a judge, but to your family." His eyes landed on the telephone. "We need to get inside." The idea was terrifying. Re-entering my own home as a burglar, a spy, felt like a profound violation. But Arthur was right. We needed more than a background check on a woman with a different name. We needed Catherine, in my house, condemning herself with her own words. Arthur's past life as a detective had left him with a network of trusted, discreet contacts. One of them was a locksmith named Ben, a man who owed Arthur a significant favor from a long-ago case. The plan was simple but fraught with risk. Arthur had observed Catherine's routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, she drove my car to a yoga class. It gave us a 90-minute window. The following Tuesday, we watched from Arthur's front window as she left, dressed in my yoga pants and one of my sweatshirts. My stomach was in knots. Ben arrived minutes later, his van unmarked. He was a quiet, efficient man who asked no questions. It took him less than 30 seconds to open my back door. Stepping back into my own home was a surreal and painful experience. It was my house, but it felt tainted. A vase of flowers I didn't recognize sat on the hall table. A new, cheap-looking abstract painting hung over the fireplace, replacing a beloved landscape my daughter Mia had painted in college. Catherine was not just occupying my space, she was actively erasing me from it. While Ben stood guard, Arthur, guided by his expertise, went to work. He was installing two devices. One was a tiny audio recorder, no bigger than a sugar cube, which he concealed behind the headboard of the master bed. The second was a small listening device on the main phone line in the study. "She'll feel most secure in your bedroom and in your study, where she's likely making her financial arrangements," he whispered, his movements swift and practiced. These are the places she'll let her guard down. My role was to act as a lookout and to ensure nothing looked out of place. I straightened a cushion on the sofa, a muscle memory that felt like a betrayal. I was a ghost in my own life, tidying up for my own replacement. The entire operation took less than 15 minutes. We were out of the house, and the door was locked again long before Catherine's 90 minutes were up. Back in Arthur's study, he connected a receiver to the devices. Now, we wait, he said, his voice tense. We didn't have to wait long. That evening, as Arthur and I ate a simple dinner of soup and bread, the receiver crackled to life. It was Catherine's voice coming from the study. She was on the phone. No, the open house is on Saturday, so we need to move fast, she said, her voice sharp and businesslike, utterly devoid of the soft, gentle tone she used with my family. I've practiced the signature 100 times. It's perfect. As for the power of attorney, my notary contact will take care of it. He's expensive, but he's reliable. There was a pause. Then she laughed, a sound so cold and empty, it made the hair on my arm stand up. David, oh please, he's completely snowed. He's so wrapped up in being my protector, he doesn't see a thing. He actually thinks selling the house is his idea, a way to give his fragile wife a fresh start away from bad memories. Men are so predictable. Arthur and I locked eyes across the table. His face was grim, but in his eyes I saw a flicker of triumph. It was the first piece, the first undeniable, irrefutable thread in the web we were weaving. Catherine thought she was the spider, but she was already caught. She just didn't know it yet. The voice that filled Arthur's study was a venomous whisper. It was Catherine, speaking from the perceived sanctuary of my bedroom, and the words she spoke were more damning than anything we had captured before. We had been listening for 2 days, gathering snippets of her logistical planning, but this was different. This was personal. The children? She purred into the phone, her voice dripping with a contempt she never showed to their faces. They're like devoted little puppies. Leo hangs on my every word. And Mia. Oh, Mia is so desperate for a mother who understands her artistic soul that she'd believe me if I told her the sky was green. They're pathetically easy. There was a pause, and then she let out that same cold, empty laugh. Once the house is sold and the money is transferred, they'll get a postcard from Mom in Tuscany. By the time they figure it out, I'll be a ghost. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a sob. Hearing her speak of my children, my beautiful, loving children, as mere obstacles, as pawns in her sick game, ignited a fire in me that burned away the last vestiges of fear and grief. All that remained was a cold, hard resolve. She had to be stopped, not just for me, but for them. Arthur switched off the receiver, the silence in the room heavy and absolute. That's it, he said, his voice a low growl. That's the emotional dagger. When they hear that, there will be no doubt. He was right. Her fraud, her criminal past, those were facts. But this was a betrayal of the heart. This was the proof my family would need, the shock that would finally wake them from the spell she had cast. Our strategy shifted in that moment. We were no longer on the defensive, merely gathering evidence to prove my sanity. We were going on the attack. It wasn't enough to expose her. We had to create a trap so perfect that she would walk into it willingly, even eagerly, and in doing so become the architect of her own destruction. The open house is this Saturday, I said, my mind racing. She's planning to accept an offer by Monday. We don't have much time. We don't need much time, Arthur said, a glint in his eye. He was in his element now, the old hunter mapping out the terrain. She's arrogant. She believes she's won. Arrogance makes people careless. He began to pace his study, his mind working furiously. She's throwing a dinner party on Friday night. I overheard her telling your friend Margaret on the phone. It's a celebration, a way to thank the family for their support during her difficult time. She's consolidating her position, making sure they're all firmly on her side before she moves in for the financial kill. A party, I whispered. It was perfect. A stage, complete with an audience. Our audience. Exactly, Arthur confirmed. And that is where we will spring our trap. The plan began to take shape over the next few hours, each piece falling into place with a terrifying and exhilarating precision. It would be a multi-layered assault designed to dismantle her lies, expose her cruelty, and force a confession, all in front of the very people she had manipulated. The bait, Arthur explained, will be the very thing she wants most, the final legal documents for the house. He had another friend, a retired lawyer named George, who specialized in contract law. George will draft a document, Arthur continued. It will look like an irrevocable power of attorney, giving her complete control over all your assets to finalize the house sale. It will look official, filled with legal jargon, but it will be a fake, and buried deep in the fine print will be a clause, a full confession clause. I stared at him, bewildered. A confession clause? A standard trick in fraud investigations, he said with a grim smile. The clause will state that by signing, the signatory, Catherine Reed, also known as Carolyn Mitchell, confesses to the crimes of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy, and relinquishes all claims to the Vance family assets. She won't read the fine print. People like her never do. They're too blinded by the prize right in front of them. It was brilliant, using her own greed as the mechanism of the trap. But there was another, more dangerous piece to the plan. We need to get the evidence in front of them, I said. The recordings, her criminal record. And we will, Arthur assured me. But the final blow, the moment that shatters her entire illusion, has to come from you. He looked at me, his expression serious. She has taken your place in that house. To truly reclaim it, you need to be there. You need to be the one to pull back the curtain. My heart hammered against my ribs. The thought of being in the same room as her, of seeing her with my family, was terrifying. How? They'll recognize me instantly. Not if they're not looking for you, he said. He then outlined the most audacious part of the plan. Mia had mentioned weeks ago that they had hired a catering company for the party, as Mom wasn't feeling up to cooking. Arthur made another call. It turned out the owner of the small catering company was the nephew of another of his old police buddies. A small donation to the Police Benevolent Fund and a promise of future business was all it took. One of the catering assistants for the Vance party had suddenly come down with the flu. They needed a last-minute replacement. You, Eleanor, are going to be a ghost at your own party, Arthur declared. A wig, a simple uniform, a pair of non-prescription glasses to alter your face slightly. You'll keep your head down, you'll be invisible, just another member of the staff. No one will give you a second look. The plan was set. It was a high-wire act with no safety net. If any part of it failed, Catherine could be spooked, disappear, and I might lose my family forever. But as I looked at the determined face of the old detective, I felt a surge of strength. I had spent months as a victim. Now, I would become the hunter. The next 48 hours were a blur of clandestine activity. While I practiced a new stooped posture and a neutral subservient expression in the mirror, Arthur and his network of old friends worked like a well-oiled machine. George, the lawyer, drafted the perfect document, complete with a forged notary stamp. Frank, the PI, compiled a neat, damning file on Caroline Mitchell. And Arthur's nephew-in-law, a tech wizard, set up a system to play the audio recordings through the house's built-in speaker system, controlled remotely from a laptop. Friday evening arrived. Dressed in the simple black and white uniform of a catering assistant, a dark, sensible wig covering my hair, I looked at my reflection. I saw a stranger, a tired, middle-aged woman, unremarkable in every way. I was ready. I was invisible. Arthur squeezed my shoulder, his hand a firm, reassuring weight. Remember the signal, he said. She will make a toast to her new beginning. That's when George, posing as an old family friend and notary, will present the document. The moment her pen touches that paper, the show begins. He handed me a small earpiece. I'll be parked down the street, listening in. You won't be alone. With a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of my heart, I walked out of Arthur's house and down the street. I walked toward the warm, golden lights of my own home, a stranger about to serve drinks at a party celebrating my own demise. The gambit had begun. Walking through the back door of my own home was like stepping into a parallel dimension. The house buzzed with the low hum of preparation. I was introduced to the catering team leader, a brisk, efficient woman named Maria, as Helen, my temporary identity. No one gave me a second glance. I was just another pair of hands, there to pass hors d'oeuvres and refill wine glasses. The anonymity was both a perfect disguise and a profound agony. My own home was a stage, and I was a backstage crew member watching the lead actress perform my life. I moved through the rooms that held 40 years of my memories, now serving as the backdrop for Catherine's grand performance. From the corner of my eye, I watched her. She was magnificent, I had to admit, too. She moved with my grace, laughed with my cadence, and touched my husband's arm with a familiarity that was nauseatingly perfect. She was comforting Mia in the living room, her hair just as I would. "Don't you worry about the open house, my love," I heard her say, her voice a perfect imitation of my soothing tone. "A new home will be a wonderful fresh start for all of us, a place without shadows." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. A moment later, she was laughing with Leo in the dining room, teasing him about a new girlfriend. He was relaxed and happy, completely under her spell. He looked at her with the open, trusting love of a son, and every adoring glance he sent her way was a fresh twist of the knife in my heart. The small earpiece, hidden by the cheap wig, crackled to life. "How are you holding up, Eleanor?" Arthur's voice was a low, steady rumble in my ear, a lifeline to reality. "It's harder than I imagined," I whispered, my lips barely moving as I arranged canapes on a silver tray. "Stay strong," he said. "George is 5 minutes out. All the pieces are moving into place." My tasks gave me the perfect cover to move through the house. I served champagne to my own friends, who smiled politely at me without a flicker of recognition. I cleared plates from the tables where my family had celebrated countless birthdays and holidays. Each movement was a painful reminder of the life that had been stolen. I felt like a ghost, haunting the periphery of my own existence, and the only thing that kept me from screaming was the cold, hard promise of the trap we had set. I saw a brief crack in her perfect facade just once. David had misplaced the special corkscrew, and for a fleeting moment when she thought no one was watching, the mask slipped. "Can't you do anything right?" she hissed at him, her voice a low, venomous lash. Her face was contorted with an ugly, impatient sneer. David flinched, looking utterly bewildered by the sudden shift. Then, just as quickly, she saw one of the caterers approaching, and her expression melted back into one of sweet, wifely concern. "Oh, never mind, darling. I'm just a little on edge. We'll find it." She patted his cheek. No one else saw it. Only me. It was a glimpse of the real Caroline Mitchell, the predator beneath the skin of Eleanor Vance. The doorbell rang, and the main guests began to arrive. My friends, Margaret among them, greeted Catherine with warm hugs. "Eleanor, you look radiant," Margaret exclaimed. "I'm so glad to see you looking so well." Catherine accepted the compliment with my self-deprecating smile. The performance was flawless. Then, a new arrival. A distinguished, Silver-haired man with a warm smile and kind eyes walked in. He carried a bottle of expensive-looking wine. "George!" David exclaimed, going to greet him. "So good of you to come." "I wouldn't miss it," the man said, his voice smooth and reassuring. It was Arthur's lawyer friend, playing the part of a long-lost family acquaintance. Through my earpiece, Arthur's voice confirmed it. "The notary is in the building. He's going to mingle, establish his presence. It's all going to plan." George was a master. He charmed everyone, telling old, vaguely plausible stories about knowing David from college. He fit in so seamlessly that no one questioned his sudden appearance. My final task felt the most perilous. Maria, the catering lead, sent me to the living room to check on the lighting. It was the excuse we needed. The large, ornate floor lamp in the corner of the room had been our target. Arthur's tech-savvy nephew had, during another of Catherine's yoga class absences, installed a microscopic camera lens in the lamp's base. It was perfectly positioned to capture the entire living room, but only if the lampshade was angled correctly. With my heart pounding, I walked over to the lamp and pretended to fuss with the bulb. My hands, slick with nervous sweat, carefully, almost imperceptibly, twisted the shade a quarter of an inch to the left. It was a tiny adjustment, but it was everything. Now, the hidden eye of our conspiracy had a perfect, unobstructed view of the coffee table, the very spot where the documents would be signed. "The camera is perfectly positioned, Eleanor," Arthur's voice murmured in my ear. "Well done. Now, just blend in. The main event is about to begin." I retreated to the kitchen, my role in setting the stage now complete. I could hear the party in full swing, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation. It was the soundtrack to my life, but I was no longer the conductor. I was a saboteur, waiting in the wings with a stick of dynamite. Through the kitchen doorway, I saw Catherine raise her glass. She was glowing, radiant, the absolute queen of her stolen castle, surrounded by my family, my friends, my life. She was at the pinnacle of her success, convinced she was untouchable. The stage was perfectly, beautifully set, and the final act was about to begin. From my position in the kitchen doorway, I watched Catherine tap a spoon lightly against her champagne flute. A hush fell over the living room. The air grew thick with anticipation. She beamed at the assembled faces. My friends, my children, my husband, all looking at her with affection and admiration. "I just want to thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice a perfect imitation of my own warm sincerity. "It's meant the world to me, having my family's support during this challenging time. But now it's time for a new chapter." She raised her glass higher. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," the room echoed. "That's the signal, Eleanor. George is moving in." Arthur's voice was a calm, steady presence in my ear. As if on cue, George, the kindly lawyer, stepped forward from the small crowd. He had a handsome leather-bound folder in his hand and an expression of apologetic urgency. "Eleanor, David, I am so sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice carrying just the right amount of professional gravity. "My office just sent this over. It's the final power of attorney for the house sale. With the offer coming in tomorrow, it absolutely needs to be signed tonight to avoid any delays in closing." Catherine's eyes lit up with a glint of pure, unadulterated greed. It was the prize, delivered to her on a silver platter. She tried to mask her eagerness with a sigh of weary responsibility. "Oh, honestly, must business always intrude? But of course, if it must be done." "It's just a formality," George said smoothly, opening the folder on the coffee table. The hidden camera in the lamp had a perfect view. "If you could just sign here, Eleanor." David leaned over to look, but George deftly angled the folder. "Standard boilerplate, David. You know how it is. Just gives Eleanor the final authority to act on the family's behalf. David nodded, placated. Catherine picked up the expensive fountain pen George offered. She didn't even glance at the text. Her eyes were fixed on the signature line, the final hurdle between her and my life's savings. The pen scratched against the paper, a sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. She wrote my name, Eleanor Vance, in a flawless, practiced forgery. She signed it, I whispered into the tiny mic on my uniform. Showtime, Arthur replied. The moment the pen lifted from the paper, it began. It wasn't a loud noise, just a subtle click as the house's sound system activated. Then, Catherine's own voice, cold and sharp, filled the living room. No, the open house is on Saturday, so we need to move fast. I've practiced the signature 100 times. It's perfect. As for the power of attorney, my notary contact will take care of it. He's expensive, but he's reliable. The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. David looked around, bewildered. What is that? Is that the radio? Catherine had frozen, her hand still on the document. Her face went pale, a canvas of dawning horror. It's a trick, she stammered, looking wildly around the room. Someone is playing a sick joke. But then the next recording began, the one I knew would shatter their world. The children? Catherine's voice sneered from the speakers, dripping with contempt. They're like devoted little puppies. Leo hangs on my every word. And Mia, oh, Mia is so desperate for a mother who understands her artistic soul that she'd believe me if I told her the sky was green. They're pathetically easy. Mia let out a small, wounded gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Leo's face, which had been smiling just moments before, hardened into a mask of disbelief and pain. David stared at Catherine, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning to suspicion. Catherine, what is this? It's not me, she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. That's been edited. It's a lie. Someone is trying to frame me. As her denial reached its peak, the large television screen over the fireplace flickered to life. For a moment, it showed only a simple file folder icon. Then, the file opened. A mugshot filled the screen. It was Catherine's face, or rather the face of Caroline Mitchell, staring out with hard, cold eyes, a booking number printed below her chin. Next to it, a list of aliases appeared. Sarah Jennings, Rebecca Price. Then scanned images of the fraud warrants from Arizona and Florida. The room was plunged into a stunned, absolute silence. My friends, my neighbors, they all stared, mouths agape, at the woman in the center of the room and then at the criminal's face on the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. Catherine was backed into a corner, her lies unraveling around her in real time. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist, and that's when I made my move. I walked slowly from the kitchen into the center of the living room. I was still carrying a silver tray. No one paid any attention to me. I was just the help. I stopped a few feet in front of her. Checkmate, I said. My voice, my real voice, cut through the silence. Catherine's head snapped towards me. Her eyes widened in genuine primal terror. For the first time, she looked at me and truly saw me. In one smooth motion, I placed the tray on a side table, reached up, and pulled off the cheap, dark wig. My own silver-gray hair cascaded down. I took off the non-prescription glasses and dropped them on the tray. I stood before them all, my family, my friends, as myself. The room erupted in gasps. The visual was impossible, a paradox brought to life. There were two of us, identical. One standing in a simple catering uniform, the other trapped in a web of her own lies, exposed as a wanted felon. David stared from me to her, his face ashen, the pieces of the last 6 months clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Eleanor, he whispered, his voice cracking. He was looking at me, truly looking at me. Mia started to cry, silent tears streaming down her face as she looked from the monster who had manipulated her to the mother she had helped cast out. Leo looked like he had been punched in the gut, his eyes filled with a devastating mixture of guilt and rage. Catherine opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was trapped, exposed, utterly and completely defeated. The predator had become the prey. Just as the chaos in the room reached its crescendo, the front doorbell rang, a sharp, authoritative chime. George, the lawyer, walked over and opened it. 2 uniformed police officers, arranged by Arthur, stood on the doorstep. "We received a call about a wanted felon, Caroline Mitchell, being at this address," the officer said, his gaze sweeping the room and landing on the identical women. George pointed a steady finger at the woman in the cashmere sweater. That would be her. The moment the police officers stepped into the room, the chaotic symphony of gasps and whispers died, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. Catherine, or Caroline Mitchell as the world now knew her, did not scream or fight. The predator within her seemed to simply collapse, leaving behind a hollow shell. Her face was a blank mask of defeat as the officers handcuffed her. As they led her past me, her eyes, my eyes, met mine for a final, fleeting moment. There was no remorse in them, no apology, only a cold, bottomless hatred for the one variable she hadn't accounted for: my will to survive. After she was gone, a profound and painful stillness settled over the room. My friends and neighbors, caught between shock and compassion, quietly began to excuse themselves, offering me brief, heartfelt touches on the arm as they left. Soon it was just the 4 of us, standing in the wreckage of the life we had once shared. David was the first to move. He took a hesitant step toward me, his face a roadmap of anguish and shame. "Eleanor," he breathed, his voice breaking. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." The words were inadequate, flimsy nets trying to capture an ocean of guilt. Mia and Leo were next, their faces pale and tear-streaked. "Mom," Mia sobbed, collapsing into my arms. "We believed her. How could we believe her?" Leo stood behind her, unable to speak, his jaw tight with a self-loathing that was painful to watch. I held my daughter, patting her back, but I felt a strange and unnerving distance. The instinctive, all-encompassing warmth of a mother was still there, but it was now insulated by a layer of newly formed scar tissue. They had not just been deceived. They had, however unwittingly, been my jailers. They had chosen the impostor over me. Forgiveness would not be a simple gift. It would have to be a bridge, built slowly, plank by painful plank, across a chasm of broken trust. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of my life. The legal proceedings against Catherine were swift. Faced with the mountain of evidence, Arthur's investigation, the recordings, her confession on the forged document, she pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. She was sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison, a ghost finally laid to rest. But at home, the battle was just beginning. David, Leo, and Mia treated me with a fragile, reverent care, as if I were a piece of priceless china that they themselves had shattered. They made me breakfast, they brought me tea, they asked constantly if I needed anything. They were desperate to atone, but they didn't know how. The easy intimacy we had once shared was gone, replaced by a cautious, painful formality. The turning point came one evening about a month after the arrest. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the new, cheap painting Catherine had hung, a constant, ugly reminder of her presence. "I'm selling the house," I announced into the silence. David looked up, alarmed. Eleanor, you don't have to. This is your home. We can make new memories. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It's not my home anymore. It's the scene of the crime. I looked at each of them, my gaze unflinching. This house is where you chose her over me. It's where my children watched me get thrown out into the rain. The shadows here are too long. I can't heal here, and I don't think any of us can. It was the first honest thing that had been said between us since my return, and it was the beginning of our healing. We didn't sell the house to give me a fresh start from bad memories, as Catherine had planned. We sold it to give us a fresh start from our shared failure. We moved into separate places for a time. David to a small apartment downtown, the children to their own places. It was a separation born not of anger, but of necessity. We all needed space to find ourselves again before we could find each other. The conversations became less about desperate apologies and more about understanding. David finally admitted that he had been so charmed by Catherine's adoration because he had felt, for years, that he had been taking my steady, quiet love for granted. Leo and Mia confessed that Catherine had exploited their deepest insecurities, making them feel seen in a way they hadn't realized they were missing. It was painful, but it was real. My friendship with Arthur Harrison became my anchor. He was the one person with whom I could speak without filter. We'd sit on his porch, drinking tea, and he would listen, his quiet wisdom a soothing balm. He had not just helped me reclaim my life, he had become a part of it. He was my chosen family, a testament to the fact that the strongest bonds are not always forged by blood, but by loyalty. 6 months after I sold the house, I bought a small, sunny condominium with a large balcony perfect for a new garden. One afternoon, David, Leo, and Mia came to visit. They didn't come bearing gifts of apology, but bags of potting soil and bright red geraniums. For hours we worked together under the warm sun, our hands in the dirt, not saying much. The comfortable silence had finally returned. As they were leaving, David paused at the door. "It's a beautiful home, Elle," he said. "It feels like you." He was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt entirely like myself. And so, my own reflection was restored. It wasn't the same face I had seen in the mirror a year ago. The lines were deeper, the eyes held a wisdom born of immense pain. I had lost the naive belief that love was enough to protect me, but I had gained a strength I never knew I possessed. I had learned that a family is not a fortress, but a garden that requires constant, honest tending from everyone within it. And I had learned that the most important life to save is always your own, and that is how I emerged from my own shadow, not just whole, but stronger. They thought they could erase me, but they forgot about the most essential part of me, my spirit. And what about you? Have you ever had to face a betrayal so deep it made you question your own reality? Share your story and tell me where in the world you're listening from, in the comments below. Knowing that brave souls like you exist gives me strength. Remember, even after the darkest night, the sun will rise again. Close your eyes and remember your own power. Until the next story.